Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at the midterm elections. They're elections that the Democrats are set to lose. Many, as we were saying in part one of our discussion, seeing it as a referendum on Barack Obama. With us to talk about it, a Republican campaign strategist, Dan Hazelwood. He is in Washington. In New York, Hank Scheinkopf, Democratic Party campaign strategist. Josh Kraushaar, whose column in the National Journal, Against the Grain, tells all on what's going on both in the White House and on Capitol Hill. And political scientist Amy Green with us in the studio. Amy, the author of America After Obama. As we said at the beginning of the show, the one issue that everyone thought would dominate has, as Amy Green was saying a moment ago, kind of faded, and the president is crowing about it.
There's a reason fewer Republicans, you hear them running around about Obamacare. Because while good, affordable health care might seem like a fanged threat to the freedom of the American people on Fox News, it turns out it's working pretty well in the real world.
Josh Kraushaar, if Obamacare has faded, what is the issue?
Well, like I said, healthcare is still the driving force among Republicans and some disaffected independents, but so much money was spent early on in the campaign cycle, almost entirely focused on the president's healthcare law, that it was almost baked into the cake. So when you see the last month of campaign ads from Republicans, they're largely incorporating the healthcare law into a laundry list of issues that Republicans don't like about the president, whether it's immigration, whether it's the economy, or whether it's foreign policy. So they've sort of incorporated the health care law into this overarching theme that the president doesn't know how to manage government, and that's one bullet point on their laundry list of attacks. But certainly it doesn't have the same resonance as it did back when the website was launched earlier in 2013, and certainly at the beginning of the campaign cycle. But it is a driving force for Republican voters. And I think there are a lot of Republicans, and again, it's some independents as well, that have been waiting to cast their vote on the president's health care law. And keep in mind, these class of senators, the Democratic senators, this is the first time they've been on a ballot since the president has taken office. So there are a lot of voters in these states that are angry and disaffected, that they're certainly casting their votes in a nationalized fashion against the president and also against the health care law. 8
years ago, 6 years ago, 4 years ago, the overarching theme beyond Obamacare, Hank Scheinkopf, was, what is the role of government in the U.S.? It was a heated argument. It's still the same argument, it sounds like.
This is the argument that's gone on in American politics since the republic was created. What should the federal government be doing? What should it not be doing? What is an overreach? What isn't? There's a general sense in some portions of the country, I would say particularly the mountain state areas, other areas with strong independent streaks, where voters may be in play, that the government has overextended itself into the lives of people. Certainly the NSA scandal, not helpful. Certainly other intrusions that people feel are very significant in a country that has a very strong streak against centralized government. And by the way, who's being blamed for all this? One Barack H. Obama.
All right. And the problem's, by the way, not just Obama or the Democrats. One journalist for National Public Radio pointing to the Senate race in Kansas, where there's no Democratic contender, and support is slipping for both the Republican and the independent. The popularity, you get mixed messages when you look at these polls. Is it about Obama? Again, I bring this question up, and there you see that the graph on the popularity of both candidates waning. Earlier, Dan Hazelwood, our correspondent in Washington, was saying how voters were telling him they were just sort of sick of the whole campaign. Is it about Obama, or is it about kick the bums out?
It's overwhelmingly about Obama. When you look at it, the Republicans are poised to win governorships in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, in Connecticut. These are states that Republicans don't normally win governorships in. I actually disagree with my colleagues. I think Obamacare is a big factor. States are still getting hit with cancellations of health care notices due to Obamacare's policies. People are seeing, Obama famously promised us that our average health insurance bills would go down, but they've actually gone up by several $1,000s. As a small business owner, my rates have gone up 28% in my company. That's the story everywhere. Hank's point of it's part of the, or Josh's point that it's one of many issues. Yeah, it's one of many issues, but it's a galvanizing issue that's driving lots of people. It's a symbol of what this president set out to go do and has executed it incredibly badly. And then in places like Maryland, another state that's a very Democratic state, Republicans are poised to win that election. It's a tight race. We don't know how it's going to go. But if Republicans win that one, it is in due to large part to the state badly executing the rollout of its state healthcare exchanges. Colorado's another state. State healthcare exchanges, again, badly executed. The Democratic governor there is in deep trouble as well. This tide of rejection rolling across the country is very much after Obama, and it's not just his ideology. What he has badly done is he has not learned the craft of governing. Bill Clinton, to his credit, George W. Bush, to his credit, they both won elections, and then they set down to the task of how do you actually govern. This president has continually rejected learning the skills of how you govern. And the whole idea that he's going to end the last, if the Republicans win the Senate, he's going to do the last 2 years of his presidency campaign mode is just going to anger the American public further, because they're just going to get angry that this is a president who is abdicating the responsibilities of governing. And that's what the American people want of all of both parties. And that's the critique of both parties is that they're not spending enough time.
But Dan, let me ask you, we saw in the last 2 years of Reagan's presidency, the last 2 years of Bush's presidency, they had hostile majorities on Capitol Hill, and they rolled with the punches. Why shouldn't Obama be the same?
Well, if you look at those presidents, they all made changes. Bill Clinton famously also had a bad 2 years at the end, but they also found ways to work with the opposition. And that's the craft of governing. How can you have a fierce battle over something that's important to you on one side, and then turn and work together on the other side to fashion a solution? And it takes both sides. We've got leaders in both parties that are willing to try and move that forward in the House and the Senate. And the president can engage, and there will be progress if people are willing to try and come together and say, we're not going to win 100%, but we're going to find areas where we can cooperate and get things done. That's the craft of governing that this president has rejected for 6 years, and now he's being rejected by the American people for that.
But is he capable of changing his stripes then?
Well, I think, hopefully as an American, and I think the world, we all hope that this president is going to focus on the craft of governing and trying to make things better. We can only look forward with optimism. As an American, I'm always optimistic, so I like to think that's the approach he'll take, but we'll have to see.
All right, I hear the but there. Amy Green, can Obama change?
Well, looking at it, following off of what the previous guest just said, of course, there are things that Obama will have to tweak. I mean, clearly there are management problems and so on. Overall, this midterm election can be characterized by an overall general dissatisfaction of the American electorate for elected politics. It could be Obama, it could be the incumbents, it could be the political system, which is increasingly polarized. The role of money in the election since the Citizens United ruling has increased. Americans are tired of that. They want authenticity. They want people who speak to their concerns without feeling like it was poll tested 200 times before being financed by a third party. Of course, Obama will have to increase his contacts with not only his own party, but also with the Republican Party, should they gain the majority.
Some are even arguing he could do more.
He could do more, but
in the last 2 years than he's done in the current 2 years.
Right, but so should be said about the Republicans, because let's not forget that the Republican Party strategy for the past 6 years has been consistently barrage the policies of Barack Obama or any attempt for discourse to later then say that the president was unsuccessful at governing. So here what we have is a situation where if the Republicans were to gain the majority in both houses, to see who has the incentive to cooperate. Will the Republican Party double down on Ted Cruz and the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party? Will they look for compromise, keeping in mind that in 2016, there are the same number of seats available in the Senate in which Republicans will be vulnerable. So we have to see, how does the Republican Party want to situate itself? Will the freshman class who are now up for re-election, or the incoming freshman class, will they double down on this ultra-conservative wing of the Republican Party, or will they also look to compromise, just as the president could do the same?
On that score, the current Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, could be the second most powerful man in Washington.
We could have, for the second time in our history, the Majority Leader of the Senate setting the agenda for America and taking us in a new direction. Victory is in the air. We're going to bring it home tomorrow night.
Josh Krashour, your thoughts? Are Mitch McConnell's dreams going to come true? Is he going to set the agenda?
Well, if Mitch McConnell has his way and not only becomes majority leader, but is able to really have a firm grasp and firm authority over his caucus, I think he's going to be very strategic, politically strategic, in trying to pass legislation that's going to put pressure on the president. It's going to really set up an interesting challenge between McConnell and the White House. I think if he is able to corral his caucus together, and that's a really big if, I think you'll see measures that don't repeal the president's health care law, but will try to brush back some of the more unpopular provisions in the law, perhaps the individual mandate, for instance.
And further to Amy Greene's point, will he be able to stare down the more hardcore Tea Party elements within his party?
Well, that's the big question. I think we'll find out pretty soon. Ted Cruz, whose name has been mentioned quite often on the show, has already made noises about trying to have a much more conservative, much more partisan approach to trying to push impeachment or trying to repeal the law rather than try to reform parts of it. And if that's the case, and if McConnell and Cruz aren't on the same page, it's going to be hard for McConnell to get his wishes through to the president. But I think you're going to see if McConnell's the majority leader, you're going to see a Keystone bill that goes through Congress to try to increase energy production on the Keystone pipeline. I think you're going to try to see some focuses on parts of the health care law that majorities of voters are opposed to, and try to force the president's hand in that regard. And I think you're going to see these continued small ball measures to really put pressure on the president and also test the White House, see if they are willing to play ball or if they're really trying to cater to their base in the final couple of years. So McConnell has a challenge on his right flank, and if he can master that, he'll have a potential political advantage, and the White House has to make a decision between rallying the base or trying to accomplish something toward the president's legacy in the final couple of years of his term.
Hank Scheinkampf, do you agree?
I agree substantially, but I do believe in the selfishness of the political system itself, which requires that people get reelected, and that is the most important mandate that any elected official faces. And the Senate Republican Conference will not want to be in the minority, so they'll figure out a way to get along, to get the particular legislation that Americans want way up front, so they can look like they accomplished stuff. Why? Because they're going to go into 2016 having to hold on to whatever they have and pick up some seats, or they're going to be out of office. They're going to be out of power, and nobody wants to be out of power. What does it mean for the president? He's going to have to get along, or if he doesn't get along, he's going to be a very unhappy person in history, because he will be blamed, not the Senate, for what occurs.
He'll be blamed, not the Senate. So what does that mean going forth the next 2 years on the world stage? Hank Scheinkampf, you talked about it. Does it mean a more isolationist United States or a more hawkish America?
Both parties have become much more isolationist. I mean, I think that's quite clear. It is hard to tell what will occur because we have limited predictability of what foreign events will occur at any given moment. Note the last 2 years, ISIS and a whole collection of other things that were unbelievable, could not have been believed before in the way that they have. The Americans, unfortunately, have a history, or fortunately, depending upon your point of view, of being pulled into foreign conflicts because there is no one else to resolve them. If we forfeit our strategic role, who knows what the world might look like? That is a real problem for us long term.
All right, lots of reactions coming in. Basel Safi saying Obama has a vision, but he's paralyzed by the dominant D.C. establishment. Let me ask you on that point, Dan Hazelwood, the likes of the outspoken Arizona senator who ran against Obama in 2008, John McCain, who's saying Obama's not tough enough when it comes to places like Syria, like Ukraine. Is that basically an anomaly when you look at most Republicans who just don't want America involved abroad?
Well, there's two different groups of people. We need to keep this in mind. There's the American public, and I think Hank's analysis is pretty accurate. So you got some bipartisan agreement there. And then you've got some individual things. What the American people really want is they want their president to display leadership and set a goal and set a direction. And I think that's one of the things that has frustrated so many people about Obama's foreign policy, where one afternoon we're about to bomb Syria, and then he goes for a walk around the White House and stretches his legs, and then suddenly we're not. And that sort of indecision is what is, I think, incredibly frustrating for foreign leaders, for the America's allies around the world. It's frustrating for the American people because The American people want to believe in our president. We want to have trust in him, and we want him to exude leadership. And what is shocking is this president is, everybody thought he had a clear ideology, but it appears he doesn't on foreign policy. This constant vacillation is incredibly frustrating. So people want to support him. And so you've got people like Senator McCain, and there's actually a number of other people in both parties who've criticized him on specific issues, because what he doesn't do is he doesn't lead. He doesn't say, this is my vision, this is where I'm going to go. Bill Clinton, in the Balkans, led. The country was incredibly reluctant. Everybody, the first Gulf War, the country was incredibly reluctant when George H.W. Bush got us involved there. Iraq, Afghanistan, the country wants leadership. Now, we may not always agree with where we go, but we want a strong, robust president who says, this is my vision, whether it's in or out, whether it's to take action here or to stand back, but give us an articulate a vision and then stick to it, instead of this, every day there's a new policy, because that's not leadership. And that's what I think people are frustrated with this president's foreign policy.
Amy Green, do you see it that way?
One of the good examples of Barack Obama communicating effectively the narrative on foreign policy was his decision to commit airstrikes against the Islamic State. He laid out in a speech the threat, the nature of the U.S. intervention, and the aim, although he couldn't set a time frame. So this is an example where he really did try to shape the narrative. Part of the weakness of Obama in foreign policy has effectively been this question of allowing the narrative to be taken from him by his political opponents in the U.S. One of the challenges of Obama's 2 terms has been effectively having to steward the United States through a time in global politics and international affairs when power is shifting dramatically. The center of gravity throughout the world is shifting in ways in which the United States doesn't have the monopoly that it might have had when it was in this unipolar moment. So it's been particularly difficult for this president to communicate a narrative in a global situation where the answers are not easy, when it's difficult to have one overarching vision that we can apply to all states, which has also been part of the reason it's been so difficult to ascribe to Obama a so-called Obama doctrine in foreign policy.
Right now, there is, when it comes to taking on the jihadists in Iraq and Syria, this unlikely coalition, and one that doesn't spell out its name, between Sunni Saudi Arabia and Shiite Iran. Let me ask you, Josh Kraushaar, if those nuclear negotiations that the U.S. is taking part in with Tehran, if they're still dragging on come January, are those going to be dead in the water?
It looks like from reports is that the White House is trying to pursue a nuclear deal. He thinks that's part of his foreign policy legacy. And I've heard from several folks close to the administration saying that this is something that they want to do, even if the deal isn't ideal, even if it's not a perfect deal or a terrific deal from the American standpoint. So I think one of the biggest political clashes we could see in the coming couple months, if Republicans do take the Senate and with this White House, is a potential nuclear deal with Iran. A Republican Senate is going to be even more upset about that than a Democratic-controlled Senate, which was also sort of lukewarm about that prospect. And you could have a real clash between the president's authority when it comes to foreign policy negotiations, like we may have with Iran, and what the congressional prerogative is as well. So I think that could be one of the first real challenges, but first real tension points between a Republican Congress and the White House if we do see a deal between the United States and Iran.
And Hank Shankov, what will be the consequences for the United States' standing in the world?
Not very good. This president, and I think Bush too also, did not understand who Vladimir Putin is. They did not understand what Russia is about, and the result is major chaos throughout the world. If you have a deal with Iran, one of the first things that will happen is that members of the Senate will jump up and down and scream very loudly, because a nuclear Iran, based upon the history of relationship between the United States and Iran, and in that Middle Eastern region, would be a complete disaster. And anybody with a half a foreign policy brain knows that. What he is perceived and what he will be perceived as a function of even the discussion of a nuclear Iran is weak, unmotivated, and having a complete lack of understanding of the politics of the Middle East and that region.
So it's better to have no deal at all and to continue with the status quo between Washington and Tehran.
It may be very well better not to have a deal and to force sanctions against a nation that is acting in a way that endangers the international community.
At the end of the day, Dan Hazelwood, your thoughts on how America will seem. And by the way, it's not just, we've been talking a lot, obviously, about the Arab world and Iran, but also here in Europe, where we're negotiating right now with Washington over a free trade agreement.
Well, look.
When you look, I agree with Hank's comments about it. I think one of the great risks of any president is to try and chase a legacy foreign policy in the last 2 years of your presidency without any domestic or international support for that structure. You can catalog the recent failures. George W. Bush's administration pursued Korea in its last 2 years, and nobody thought that went well. Clinton had his problems with the Kyoto Treaty. You can go back through history all the way back to Woodrow Wilson, who the League of Nations, where he helped engineer it and then couldn't lead America to support it. If the president wants to head in some sort of legacy direction in foreign policy, he better spend a long time working with the political leadership of this country, our allies overseas, trying to forge an agreement rather than just trying to pop a rabbit out of the hat and say, see, this is what you meant to give me the Pulitzer Prize for a number of years ago, the Nobel Prize for a number of years.
So Dan, the lesson there from Woodrow Wilson, don't spend too much time in Paris. We're going to have to, unfortunately, leave it there. I want to thank you, Dan. I want to thank Hank Schenkampf in New York, Josh Krashour for being with us, and Amy Green. Stay with us because Media Watch is next. And joining us for our Media Watch segment is James Creedon. Panel's not been too kind to Barack Obama. What are you seeing?
Well, whether it be French or US media coverage, certainly the sound bites aren't being very kind to Barack Obama. Francois, let's take a look at the front cover of, to start with, Le Courrier International, a French magazine which looks at reaction from around the globe. And this is how they've summed up the English-speaking press coverage of Obama. The myth in crumbs or in pieces, le mythe en miettes. And if you look at an editorial from today's Washington Post, they're saying a campaign about nothing is still about Barack Obama. And so the midterm election has been summed up as a Seinfeld election, according to this editorial, a campaign about nothing. But that's not correct, according to Dan Balls, who says this is an election that is still very much about how people view Barack Obama. Yet Democrats dare not speak about him, Francois. So how can it be about him if you can't speak about him? This is, I suppose, the dilemma for Democrats. And this one, I think, sums it up. This is Yahoo, the French edition's cartoon, their cartoon of the day. So you have Democrats 2014 taking a selfie and poor old Barack Obama being pushed out of the frame, Francois. Not very nice. Meanwhile, this is a headline in the French state broadcaster's website. Barack Obama, the eternal hesitator, the eternally hesitant. We heard that reaction just a little while ago during one of the panel's analyses of things. And you can see here again that same idea coming through in a graphic by Bloomberg Business Week. You can see on various different issues, whether it be healthcare, drones, Syria, Russia, immigration, etc. Barack Obama looking pretty cool, but perhaps not necessarily making a decision. I think that's what it's trying to say in any case, this graphic. France TV Info's website that I just showed you, they also said, what about the risk of a one-term, or that this could end up, well, not one term, but that comparing him to Jimmy Carter in any sense. Even though he didn't get re-elected. Jimmy Carter, but even Jimmy Carter is faulting Barack Obama on ISIS. Dear. So there you go. But one person is standing with Obama. Well, not just one person, but for the sake of oversimplifying, Kim Kardashian is standing with Obama in midterm elections, Francois, and on her social media sites, you can see all sorts of comments and support. Find out what you need to cast your ballot. And various images such as that, encouraging the public to go out and get to the polls.
Kim Kardashian.
Yes. She mightn't have the most credibility, but she's standing with the president.
All right. At the beginning of a groundswell, perhaps we'll continue to follow that. To James Creedon, I want to thank you. I want to thank the rest of our panel for joining us. Stay with us. There's more coverage of the U.S. elections on our website, France24.com.